Hey everybody, welcome back to Council Sessions. Dave Cottingham here with the podcast host of the Mandalore podcast and my co-host for this show here, Martin Donison, aka Cyber Ren. How are you, sir?
I am doing great. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for coming back and joining me.
Anytime. And I'm representing. Look at it.
I know, right? You got the Inside the Force t-shirt right there. I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I actually got some new shirts I need to send you, like I was telling you.
Cool.
They actually say Inside the Force on it too, so people know exactly what you're wearing. It says it on the back, though.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
so. That's right. But I got some good shirts that are making. So
cool.
All right. So Council Sessions, as always. Thanks everybody for joining us. We are deep diving into those burning questions that kind of linger out in the galaxy. The one that we're going to talk about today kind of stems a little bit from basically the show that is out there right now running on Disney Plus, and that is Andor. As we record this, episode 9 just dropped. I know Martin hasn't even seen it yet.
Too busy at work. Yeah, I'm going to watch it as soon as we're done this.
That's right. I won't even. I've been refraining from actually saying anything to you after I watch it because I don't want to sway you either way.
Yeah, because you watch it early in the morning.
I watch it first thing in the morning. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't get up that early.
Yeah. First thing in the morning, and I'll get another viewing in tonight. I'll probably watch it again tonight. But this is that. But that centers around what we're going to talk about. As I'm watching this series, there's a lot. Not only the beginning of the rebellion that we're seeing in this show with Andor and with Luthen and Mothma, but we're also seeing a lot more of the Empire, how they are made up, especially with the ISB that is trying to track down Andor. So a question kind of popped in my head the last couple of days, and that's, with this show out there now, how has your view of the Empire changed at all? And in what way? So before we get to answering that, Martin, let's kind of take a step back and first start out by saying, before this show, what was your view of the Empire? What all did you know about the Empire? I know growing up, with the movies, we tend to, as fans, have to believe that the Empire is evil, like they're the bad guys. Yep. The rebellion is saving everybody, is giving freedom to the galaxy. But as we've kind of come to see in other shows, comics, books, there's different points of view, right, of everything in Star Wars. So what is that point of view of the Empire now? So take us back a little bit, and what was your view before the show? How did you feel, and what were your thoughts about the Empire?
Well, I think if you go back, wasn't Lucas's vision always the Empire is basically like the Nazis in space? And that's kind of how it was presented to us right off the bat. Go back to Star Wars: New Hope. What's the first thing we see? Stormtroopers blasting through a door, shooting everybody in sight, and then Darth Vader following them. That's the Empire. That's our first perspective on them. And no matter what you, as a Star Wars fan, that's the lasting image you get. Here's the Empire, Stormtroopers, Darth Vader. That's it. And then only later on in the movie, which, and this is a question I kind of wanted to bring to you tonight too, is only later on in the movie, we see a round table of Imperial commanders and officers discussing what's going on while Darth Vader's pacing around the room. And I found it odd. I always found that scene odd because Darth Vader tries saying things and he's basically told to shut up. And when he's strangling the guy, force choking the guy yelled, "Vader, enough of that." Okay, whatever. I thought Vader, being Palpatine's apprentice, he's second in command, and yet he seemed to be allowing them to bark orders at him. So I always found that really weird. Is he not second in command all the time since he became the apprentice?
Yeah, that's a little strange because it's to everybody else, no one really knows he's an apprentice, right? The Sith.
Okay.
No one really thinks about master and apprentice in that because Palpatine is a senator that became chancellor, that became emperor because he was voted that way, right? So basically, basically the galaxy gave him the emperorship. Vader just happens to be this dark warrior that is his follower kind of thing, that to everybody else. So and I don't know if this has been canonized, but I know before canon, it was always understood that the Death Star was Tarkin's, and like he was in charge of it. So he was basically the ruler of the Death Star. So it was kind of Vader had to kind of listen to him, even though, yes, he is technically the second most powerful person in the galaxy. But Tarkin is the end all be all in charge of the Death Star.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting way to spin a new perspective on it, because after these scenes, Vader is in charge after that. So, once we get through A New Hope, then he's the guy.
Because there's no more Death Star. Yes.
Yeah. So interesting. Because Tarkin was the one that was always giving him orders. I guess that makes sense. But anyway, so back to your first part of the question. That's where my view of the Empire is stormtroopers blasting at everybody, Darth Vader, big imposing figure. We get a little bit of these guys around a table, but what I felt from them is that they're a military group. Mm-hmm. And it always seemed like the Empire was just a military force that took everything, well, by sheer force. I don't mean to use the same word twice, but they're a military group that took everything by force. And that's the feeling that I always got about them, because basically that's what we saw, was them deciding, on making war decisions and then going out and attacking and fighting and winning battles by brute force and by sheer outnumbering everybody with stormtroopers and TIE fighters. That to me was the Empire. I didn't think anything different of them other than this is a gigantic military group that's just overpowering everybody.
And was that a kind of a view of evil? Like you would place that viewpoint as an evil organization, or just a militarized organization? Like, well, obviously, like you said, the Nazis were a military almost entity that was evil because they just killed everybody, and they obviously did what they did. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of your viewpoint? Yeah,
that's the impression that lasted with me for 40 plus years, right?
Yeah.
So, just a military and a bad group. I mean, because Vader comes in, stormtroopers shoot everybody, and Vader comes in, and we see him force choking people. We see him capture Princess Leia, and he's torturing her to get information. I mean, there's nothing good about any of that. They never presented us with this view of the Empire that is like, no, we're doing this for a good reason. We're trying to, there was no talk about the Empire's trying to bring peace to the galaxy. It wasn't. It was already beyond that point. And we're at the point now where the Empire's fighting the rebellion. It's good versus evil.
Yeah.
That's the perspective they gave us.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I believe in the crawl of episode 4, it does say the evil galactic empire, So we are presented with that in the viewpoint. And yes, I think the characteristic of it is evil, but thinking back also through the original trilogy. So in A New Hope, right? Mm-hmm. Just quickly run through what everybody kind of already knows, but you're on Tatooine. You see mainly thugs and scum and villainy, right? You don't really see civilization really, besides maybe Uncle Owen and Beru. And then you immediately go to the Death Star, which is all the Empire, and then you immediately go to Yavin, which is all the rebellion. And then even in The Empire Strikes Back, the only civilization we see is Cloud City, and we don't really even see that much of it. We only see the parts that have the Rebel and the Empire in it.
Yeah.
Then you get to Return of the Jedi. You go back to Tatooine, but you only go back to Jabba's palace. And then you go to Andor, which only has Ewoks on it. So what I'm getting at is that you actually don't ever see normal civilization through the original trilogy. You only see the fighting between the rebellion and the Empire. So you really are skewed in a sense because, like you said, from the very get-go, it's these bad, evil stormtroopers versus these rebels that are trying to free the galaxy from this oppression. But we never really see the oppression, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we never see them like we do now, in a sense, in other mediums, destroying planets, stripping resources, killing people for no reason. You know, we just in the original trilogy, we never saw that. Even though this mentality we get of the Empire is they're the bad guys. You know, they're the bad guys, right?
Well, you can't forget. I mean, they blew up Alderaan in front of Princess Leia. So
very true. But
that's evil.
No one had any sympathy. I don't think anybody really had any sympathy for it because we never even knew what Alderaan looked like.
Yeah.
Like, to us, how do we even know if it was even had any people on it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
We had to feel through Carrie Fisher's performance.
Correct.
Watching her home planet blow up. We had to watch her performance of how that made her feel and her reaction to it, and that's what made us feel like, holy, okay. They just blew up her planet. Like, but again, we were not personally attached to that planet or those people.
That's right.
Yeah.
And yes, and blowing up a planet, of course, yes, that's probably the ultimate evil. But as we come to find later, no one really even knew that happened until much later, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so let's move on then to the prequels, right? The prequels come out because you did make an interesting comment saying that this viewpoint lasted for 40 years. So did the prequels change at all your how now knowing basically how the Empire came about?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Did that change at all at that point?
Maybe 40 is the wrong number, but whatever years it was from the original trilogy to when the prequels came out, however many years, that's how many years I had that perspective.
It was about 18,
right? So,
18 years, 18, 20 years. Yeah.
God, it felt longer than that.
Yeah.
Oh, for real. So after the prequels, because now we're going back to a time period where the Empire isn't there yet. We watched it. We watched the Senate, and we watched how Palpatine, like you already described, got the votes to put him into power, and then he slowly transitioned it over. So, again, I think it still carries a bit of an evil note to it because we know who Palpatine is. We know what he did and how much sneaking and behind the scenes lying and everything that he was doing to make this happen. Like he played the long game better than anybody else, and he basically pulled the wool over everybody's eyes, over the whole galaxy's eyes, to get them to vote him into power and give him exactly everything that he wanted and needed, and that was total control. That is still evil to me. There was no good intent behind that. You know, with what he was doing, even though he was pitching to the Senate and everybody there, and I think it's because we saw the original trilogy first. I think if the prequels had to come first, we maybe would have just slowly changed our perspective over time. But because we already know who he is and where he was, I still feel like, you know, we know what you're doing. We know what you're up to. You're not a good guy. I just found it fascinating to see how he did it. I mean, the story is still amazing because we saw what exactly he did, the strings he was pulling to give himself the power.
Right.
So I don't think the prequel trilogy changed my perspective of the Empire yet because at that point yet, because we knew where it was going and we knew what he was up to in his process. So
yeah.
For
me, I think what the prequels did for me was, well, for one, it was completely surprising to me to learn that Palpatine didn't take the galaxy. It was given to him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was incredibly surprising to learn.
He's the great manipulator, right?
Absolutely. The ultimate manipulator. And there's no question that he is obviously evil. And his intentions are power, for power, the Sith power, the lust to rule and the lust to destroy the Jedi. So that was his pure motivation, obviously. And then, of course, what happened with politics, the Senate and the buildup of the military, it was just all this plan to manipulate, like you said, how people view the Clone Wars, right? They're viewing these separatists as kind of traitors to the Republic, when in fact they were kind of the rebellious type trying to fight the corruption that was already in the Republic.
Yeah.
So you have this clone war, you have these clones made to act like they're protecting the Republic when in fact they are militarizing the Republic in order to take over. I mean, it's unbelievably intelligent.
Oh yeah.
And once the prequels were over and you start to think how you get from episode 3 to episode 4, because there's 19 years in between those movies. And you start to think, what is the Empire again? What is the Empire doing during that time? Because again, once we get to the original trilogy, we don't really see life outside of the war, and all we're seeing, and we do get a lot of life in the prequels because we see Naboo and we definitely see Coruscant. We see other civilizations that the war goes to, right? So Kashyyyk. I mean, there's so many different, there's thousands and thousands of systems.
Yeah.
So it just makes it's mind blowing in a sense how vast the galaxy opened up with the prequels, and how possibly could Palpatine keep control? Well, that's where the clones come. That's where ultimately the buildup of the stormtroopers come. So, and then of course appointing governors and Moffs all over the galaxy to control. So, because the Death Star isn't there yet to control the fear. It's to rule by fear yet, right? Because the Death Star is still being built, and we know it doesn't even get completed until close to Rogue One, basically. So my viewpoint really was, at the point of at the end of episode 3, I was just, it was very surprising to know that the galaxy accepted the Empire. Like this was the new this was the new version of the Republic.
Yeah.
And I found it very fascinating because to me, it kind of changed the way, again, I view going into episode 4, because now you're kind of thinking, okay, does the rebellion, how do people view the rebellion? Because I think what we're learning is a lot of people, not a lot, but I mean, a big amount of people probably in the galaxy, we talked about this before, view them as terrorists, not rebel agents trying to free the galaxy.
Yeah, you're right.
So let's now get to Andor. This series has come out. I mean, we've seen Obi-Wan during this period. We've seen the movie Solo during this period, in between 3 and 4. So there is this presence of the Empire, Star Destroyers, TIE fighters, patrol units everywhere. Planets getting stripped like Mimbam. The planet that I can't remember the planet that Obi-Wan visits. We see this just torn apart, right? Planets getting torn apart, and people not really realizing it because they're distant planets. So nothing in the core world, as we're learning with Andor, seems to be that affected. In fact, on Coruscant, it seems like some people are thriving with the Empire. So now we're at the Empire during Andor, and we're seeing more and more of who they are and what they're doing. So now let's get to that question. Now going through about 8 episodes, you've only been through 8 episodes. Going through 8 episodes now, is your viewpoint still the same as what it was before, or has it changed?
Well, it's changed in how Andor has presented the Empire, because, like you said, we're in a different stage. We're in that in-between timeline now between the prequels and the original trilogy. So now with what Andor is presenting to us, and we've discussed this a lot on The Mandalore, I am so fascinated by the eye-opening that the show is providing. Or opening doors to an otherwise closed world that we never knew existed. what's changed the most for me is to realize that the Empire is not a military group. It's a government. And they've got employees, they've got staff, they've got workers, they've got people sitting in cubicle offices, thousands of them punching buttons.
They probably have a good benefits package.
Right, yeah, probably. But I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined the Empire being like that behind the scenes.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
You and me going to work and we're sitting in a cubicle beside each other. You're checking gas, whatever amounts, and I'm checking the cost expenditures. Like, I have no idea. It's crazy. So it's totally turned it over that now we're looking at a government, we're looking at a workforce, we're looking at people just living their lives. They get up and go to work every day for the Empire. That's just that they got a job with the government, and that's what they're doing. And we brought up on the Mandalore, we were talking about, well, there's got to be janitors there. There's got to be, someone's got to keep because look at the Empire. It's pristine condition. Sure, it could be droids dealing with all of that, but maybe not in every location. And so that is the most major point for me, is that gone is the militaristic view. It is now this government, this city, and they're just running things. And it also, if you want me to add to it, like, it also changed my view that they were trying, in their minds, even though the Emperor was like, I want total power and rule the galaxy, everybody that was underneath him was just like, yeah, the Empire's good. Like, they cleaned everything up. I've got a job. I'm getting paid. I'm able to feed my family or take care of my mom. Like, there's so many people that just said, heck yeah, this is way better than ever was. Like, at least I'm being taken care of now.
Yes.
And that's why you had so many supporters of the Empire. And that's why it was so hard for the rebels to prove otherwise, that no, they're not good. Don't trust them. So yeah, Andor alone has changed everything for me, how I look at the Empire.
Yeah, and that's a good point about them. People accepting them in the beginning, because there was the Bad Batch. I mean, we even saw in the Bad Batch when they opened up recruitment for the stormtroopers. Like, people volunteered right away because they knew they were going to get meals every day. They were going to get paid.
We saw it in Solo too.
Yeah, totally. It was like, this is a great living, and I want to serve my government, my military. So they had a good thing. I feel like they had a good thing going, in a sense, for all these years. Now, Andor has, I wouldn't say it did to me what it did to you, because I kind of already had a little bit of that idea that they were a government through a lot of the stuff that I've been reading, books and comics already throughout that time. Yeah. So, and because of the prequels, and the fact that he kept the Senate in place, which is mind-boggling to me. But he still relied on senators to kind of enforce his message, even though a growing number of them were starting to fight him, like Mothma and Bail and things like that. So, but there's always that in every government, right? There's two sides. There's two parties all the time fighting each other.
Yep.
So I was always kind of under the impression before Andor that, that basically they were the Empire was viewed really, really well with the core worlds and the inner rim, mid rim type worlds, because they were highly involved in, had more money and more resources, and they were gaining most of the resources. They were more middle, high class. And it was the ones that were in the outer rim and the expanded regions that were really feeling the might of the Empire. Mandalore being one of them, right? Getting wiped out. Yeah. You've got Kashyyyk getting wiped out. You got all these different planets that just got stripped, or just their people just got. I mean, Wookiees got put into slavery. I mean, it's like there was definitely an evil side of them that a lot of people didn't know about. And you're right. I think that's what the rebellion was trying to do, was trying to open everybody's eyes on what was happening throughout the galaxy. So, but I would say, fortunately, most people on Coruscant probably didn't care. It didn't affect them.
Yeah.
what am I going to do about it? So I do think that, I mean, what has really opened my eyes about Andor regarding the Empire is basically how we got to how do I say this? How the circumstances of what's happening in Andor changed the Empire's methods, which ultimately caused a lot more people to be open to what's happening. It wasn't necessarily the rebellion. The Empire almost did it to itself, which is pretty fascinating what this show is doing. That's why I think this show is brilliant.
Yeah, because and it's Luthen and the people working with him that's what they wanted.
Exactly.
He's like, because in this not this week's episode, but last week, he's like, we have to make things get worse for people to see. Like, make the Empire angry so that they overreact and do what we know they're doing behind the scenes. Make it public.
Right. The line he says is, oppression breeds rebellion.
Yeah.
I mean, it's brilliant. So,
yeah.
So I love that. I love that. I love how we're seeing that in this series. We're not just seeing what the tagline is, the birth of the rebellion. We're actually seeing the mistakes and changes of the Empire.
Yeah.
Which is just fascinating. So interesting kind of, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and to just add to it, the other part that I like, what they're opening my eyes to, is one question that I always had during the other two trilogies is, how did they do that without anybody knowing? How did they build fleets and fleets of Star Destroyers without anybody knowing? Where did this come from? And we know now, they were decimating planets and taking all the resources, but nobody knew that. Nobody knew what was going on. And that's what Andor is also showing us. Prison camps.
Yeah.
Prison factories, and enslaving so many people in completely hidden bases, like we talked about in the other podcast, that those bases are so well camouflaged. They're underneath the oceans, and the surface of them looks similar to the landscape. Right. Nobody would know they're there, and they're doing this. And you've got this enslaved workforce that is just pumping out machine parts like crazy, and you know for sure that is not their only prison camp. They probably got hundreds of those all spread out through the galaxy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And there you go. That's how they did it.
That's right.
That is what's blown me away. And like, holy cow, because I never could imagine how the Empire pulled that off, because those Star Destroyers are not small. No. So I hope through this show we get to see the next step. All we saw is so far is small machine parts being built. Let's get to the next factory where the ship is being put together.
Oh,
that's what I want to see.
Well, I'm pretty sure there's a planet called Kuat, which has a big shipping yard. So I'm assuming that's where that's where ultimately the Star Destroyers are being built. A lot of the Star Destroyers, I don't think they were called Star Destroyers. I can't remember what they were called. The Star Cruisers, big Star Cruisers from the Clone Wars were pretty much made there, and I'm assuming they just modified them. But okay, so a quick follow up to that then is, because I found this interesting to think about, is do you think, if I don't really like doing what ifs, but this is kind of a what if. But what if there wasn't a rebellion? Would the Empire actually have worked going forward, and what ultimately would have happened? Or was it always going to be destined to have a rebellion based on what they were doing?
Well, I think because you brought it up already, if it wasn't for what Andor did, what Luthen hired him to do and steal all those credits, that's what kicked the Empire into this other gear and go overboard with the reaction. If none of that ever happened, if the Empire just was allowed to continue doing what it's doing, it probably would have been successful for a very long time. If they managed to oppress everybody and nobody really knew that they were, I think they would have just, I have no idea how, 50 years, 100 years, like how long could that have gone on for? Because if nobody's fighting them, then they've got no reason to show force anymore.
That's right.
Right?
And then once the Death Star was complete, who was gonna fight back?
Yeah.
Who's gonna say anything?
Exactly.
So that is interesting to think, and part of me does feel like it probably would. I mean, it would have worked for a majority of the galaxy. I feel like, because again, inner planets like Chandrila and Hazian Prime and Coruscant. I mean, they would have not been affected.
Yeah, they were.
Alderaan would have still been around.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, So yeah, it's sad to think. Obviously, it didn't get any better after the Empire because the First Order came and wiped even more out. But after the sequel trilogy, apparently maybe there's a little bit of peace. But we'll see once we get content beyond that. But
and like you said, the inner planets, they're all living rich, so they didn't really care. But the outer planets, I mean, the Empire didn't really reach to the outer planets that much either. They let the outer planets just go about your way, just live whatever.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, stormtroopers came around to look for something or look for somebody, but they also didn't bother those planets, so they didn't care.
All right.
I mean, didn't we see in some of the movies, some of the characters like, who cares what's going on with the war? Like, we're not involved.
Yeah. Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So
that's very true. They don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. It's a really good contemplative question because the Empire almost probably could have been okay for the galaxy if the rebels just let it alone.
Yes.
Because it's not like the Emperor, it's not like Palpatine is going around killing people just because. All he wanted to do was be in control and rule the galaxy.
That's right.
As long as you
and get rid of the
his,
Jedi, basically.
Yeah, get rid of the Jedi. But he made everyone believe the Jedi were bad.
That's right.
So, and it worked, right? It worked.
Right.
So
it worked.
He just wanted total power. That was it. I mean, the Jedi is the only thing that opposed him. So get rid of them, be in power, and now he just sits there on his throne.
I know.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. It's actually brilliant, and it's horrible because it's the bad guys. But okay, so in the end, Andor has changed your view of the Empire.
Yeah, well, given me more perspective, more in-depth perspective, because I'm not a dummy. Like you, I knew in the back of my mind they're a government and we never got to visually see it.
Correct.
I'm a very visual person, and getting to see everything opened my eyes to so much more. And that's what I appreciate Andor so much. I mean, people are complaining that it's too slow or whatever. You really got to look at what it's telling you. And there is not a series like this one out there. It is presenting so much more than we've ever seen before.
Yeah, and I only say that because when the canon recanonized back in 2015, and new books were coming out. Books like Catalyst, which was the prequel book to Rogue One, Tarkin, Lords of the Sith. I mean, these books kind of gave you an inside look at the Empire at this point also. So, and Thrawn, the Thrawn trilogy, really kind of centered around what the military side and the Empire was doing. So, I had a lot more perspective about this timeline of the Empire way before Obi-Wan and Andor came out. So, but it's true. I'm in the same boat though. Andor has definitely changed. It has changed my view of how they handled themselves, during the rebellion.
Yeah.
And we're going to see that more as the series goes on, I think too. So, which is, it really you really get a better sense of how we got to episode 3 and 4 of where the Empire stands, which is pretty awesome. So,
totally.
All right.
Yeah.
So, great talking. That was a great discussion. So much there. And of course, as Andor goes, and I have 3 episodes left. You still have 4.
It's after this. I'll have 3.
After this, we'll see where the Empire ends up by the end of this season and into season 2 of Andor. And of course, we're going to learn even more. I believe with the second season of the Bad Batch will be debuting also in January.
Can't wait for that.
I can't wait for that either. I'm going to go back and rewatch it before we get to that point because I want to refresh my memory on it. But all right, of course, come back right here to Inside the Force on YouTube, and then of course check out the Mandalore podcast, where Martin and I deep dive into every episode of Andor and all the Disney Plus shows, Star Wars shows.
We
They're
dive
on that
deeper
platform.
than the prison goes down in the ocean.
Way deeper. Oh yeah. Way way deeper. All right. Thanks, Martin.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. We'll see you next time. May the Force be with you.